Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. Heavy rain and storms since early June have caused flooding and landslides in over a dozen provinces of China. The death toll has been rising. Houses have collapsed and hundreds of thousands of people have been forced to evacuate and are now in urgent need of basic living assistance. Why have the floods been so severe this year? Have imperfect urban construction and the destruction of the ecological environment aggravated the disasters? Will China be able to control the damage to a minimum and prevent such heavy flooding in the future? To answer these questions and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Professor Qi Ye from the School of Public Policy and Management at Tsinghua University and Victor Gao Zhikai, Chairman of the China Energy Security Institute. But before we get started, let's look at this.
Across central and southern China, millions of people have been displaced by floods. President Xi Jinping has ordered the PLA and the armed police force to send more troops to support flood control and disaster relief in areas battered by the rainstorms. As the water levels keep on rising, more than 2,700 troops from Hubei's armed police units, together with 95 vehicles and speedboats, have reached the severely flooded areas. And they're the ones who have inspired tales of heroism. Working in the rain and mud for days, soldiers risk their lives to carry countless numbers of sacks. They stay on the front line to help resist the flooding and evacuate the residents. 18-year-old Zhu Jianhui is one of them.
We haven't taken any rest from morning until now. All of us carry sacks. I didn't know the exact number, about 200 sacks each. We feel more and more powerful now.
And there are many muddy heroes like Zhu Jianhui, always ready to do anything to save lives without complaining.
Although I'm muddy and very tired, I'm delighted to contribute to the safety of the residents.
The continuous rainstorm has turned places like Hubei, Jiangsu and Anhui provinces into a world of water. More than 160 people have been killed. The disasters have also led to the collapse of 73,000 houses and forced the evacuation of almost 2 million people, of whom more than half are in urgent need of basic living assistance.
Gentlemen, Victor, first of all, can you brief us on the severity of the flooding situation across China, particularly in southern China?
I think in recent memory, this flooding, as well as the typhoon associated with it, probably have broken all the track record. In many places, the meteorological record have been broken again and again for the severity of the rainfall, as well as the widespread areas of the disaster hit by the flooding, and also the number of people who have to be evacuated. And I think there have been many lessons that China need to learn. First of all, many dikes have broken during this flooding season. And also, I think when the soldiers are called to assist in the flood control tasks, many of them actually have to work with their bare hands. So questions have been raised as to where are the equipment, whether there are better ways to mobilize the resources, etc. So I think while we pray for all the people in the flood-stricken area, we also need to find better ways for the future to control such flood and build up stronger dikes and stronger flood control systems in China.
Professor Qi, what can you tell us about the devastation and the disasters themselves at this moment?
Well, definitely this time around we see more from the social media than the severity of the flood. You see in the tunnels, in subway system, in the stadium, the sports center, and grocery stores, shopping malls, all affected. You see people in a desperate situation, waiting for help. Also see scenes that has shown that you have the soldiers helping the local residents. I mean, it is a devastating and to a very large scale, and the people's daily life has been affected in a very severe way.
18 years ago, back in 1998, when we had the worst case scenario about the flooding in southern China in particular, I was in the forefront. I covered almost all the hardest hit areas with my own reporting team. What do you think of a comparison? Does it make any sense for us to compare the severity of the current flooding with what we went through 18 years ago?
Well, 18 years ago, I remember when you were covering all these flooding events, and when the Chinese Prime Minister Zhu Rongji was standing on the broken dam, he was actually criticizing in very severe terms about the quality of the water control systems. And I think now 18 years have passed. When we look at the flooding this year, even though it's unprecedented in scale and severity, I still personally hope that the quality of the dams, flood control systems can be better, and also emergency response can be better organized. This time, the problem is not only in the severity of the flooding itself, it's the way that the mobilization work has to be done so that people can be given forewarning. For example, people can be evacuated beforehand rather than being left behind, hit by the flooding itself, and then you mobilize the soldiers or the emergency rescue teams to rescue the people in dire need. So I think there is a priority issue. How do we allocate better priorities, for example, so that everyone, not only just the government agencies, but people, the ordinary people, the folks in the streets, in the farms, in the cities, for example, and this time the flooding not only hit the rural areas and the rural population, and it also hit many major metropolises. Wuhan, for example, has been hit by a big flood, and I think lots of people lack the basic training how to save themselves in an emergency like this. We need to catch up in this.
When we look at the severity and the level of devastation of the city of Wuhan, capital city of Hubei province, many argue, I mean, this is controversial, by the way, many argue that were it not for the construction of the Three Gorges Dam, the city would have been immersed, would have been under the water. What do you think of the pros and cons concerning the current debate about the Three Gorges Dam?
The Three Gorges Dam was built, there is a major idea in mind back then was to prevent and control flood, the flood, especially from the upper reach. And let's compare this flood with the one in 1998. There is a major similarity between the two, which is the East Asian summer monsoon was enhanced and strengthened by the El Nino, the very big similarity to the 1998. So this time around, perhaps there is a high likelihood that the overall climate change has made it even worse. So you put all this together, a summer monsoon, a strengthened summer monsoon, El Nino, and climate change. This probably is the primary causes for the major flood, major the rainfall and the flood. And the Three Gorges Dam, we have not really seen the evidences that clearly and explicitly indicate that is the cause or a significant part of the cause for this flood. However, if we're thinking about the function that's supposed to be exerted by the Three Gorges, it has not really playing a very significant role in helping the situation. I also want to echo Mr. Gao's point. The observation this time around, we see the severe damage really occurred in the metropolitan areas. I think this may have a lot to do with our urban planning and the city design, and we see more and more lakes and wetland within the city boundary that has disappeared. That those wetlands, those lakes, supposed to play a very important role in take the water, the flood water, and that has not been seen.
Right, you're right. For example, Wuhan, as we said earlier, the capital of Hubei used to have 127 lakes in the 1950s. But now only 40 to 50 are left in the central city. So those lakes back in the 1950s used to cushion the impact of a flooding,
exactly.
But most of that function seemed to have disappeared to our dismay. What do you think of the man-made disasters or natural disasters will account for more of the consequences?
Well, definitely, I think scientists need to do thorough studies about the impact of the Three Gorges Dam and also the impact of the rapid urbanization which have happened along the middle reaches as well as the lower reaches of the Yangtze River. Many new cities are coming up and they have taken tremendous amount of land, and as you just now mentioned, many lakes or even rivers have been changed the course or changed in terms of the total areas covered by these lakes. And I think there must be a correlation. We need to have the scientists do the homework to find out. Also, I will say, to give the Three Gorges Dam the benefit of the doubt, this time the precipitation actually happens in those provinces and areas to the east of the Three Gorges Dam. So I think we should avoid holding the Three Gorges Dam to account before the scientists really come up with all the hard numbers to show what exactly is the correlation between the construction of the Three Gorges Dam versus the severity of the flood this time. But one thing which is simple, given the severity of the flood, I think the people and the government need to do the homework backward. That is, what else can we do to beef up the quality of the dams and the dikes, and what can we do to train the people to be well prepared against all these kind of worst case scenarios. Given the climate change impact, I'm afraid such natural disasters will become more and more often as well as more severe in the coming years.
Well, there are many implications concerning the construction of the Three Gorges Dam in terms of, for example, ecological damage, in terms of the pile-up of the sediment. And, but back in perhaps the 1950s, right after the founding of the PRC, the flooding in this new republic reminded the first generation of the Chinese Communist Party, like Chairman Mao, of what should be done to improve the livelihoods and to alleviate the people's concerns about the floods. So scholars must have debated and discussed for decades, if not centuries, in our history about the building of major dams, flood control projects. What do you think of the wisdom of building the Three Gorges Dam? Now, some people in China even went as far as to suggest that this dam, the mega project, needs to be dismantled. Well, that's very radical. What do you think?
Well, I think this once again highlighted the point: a precautionary principle must be observed in building large projects like this. And I think among all this discussion, on the functions that the dam was built to exert the certain functions, perhaps nowadays, if we look back, the project focused more on the power generation than the other functions, like flood control, like the ecological conservation restoration, like the sediment problem. Those issues may not have been given sufficient attention when the dam was built. Listen, in the past, for so many years, the Department, the Ministry of Water Resources, these engineers are so good in building dams for power generation, but this ecological conservation is more of a recent idea. So now when we look at this, and there are many lessons we can learn if we could have done this again. We probably have to give it a second thought in terms of design of a large dam like this.
Thank you very much. You're watching Dialogue with Victor Gao Zhikai and Professor Qi. We're discussing the devastation brought about by very serious flooding across China. We'll be back after this. Welcome back. PLA soldiers and armed policemen in their thousands have been mobilized to help with the flood control and the rescue efforts upon the direct orders of President Xi Jinping, who is, by the way, chairman of the Central Military Commission. Now, they are, of course, the heroes of this nation. They always appear at the defining moment of major disasters. What do you think of the role that the armed forces play in alleviating public concerns?
Of course, I think in critical moments when people's lives are threatened, the PLA soldiers and officers, as well as armed police officers and soldiers, really step up and they rush to the forefront. They actually, do not even care about their own lives when they are doing their best against all odds to save the lives of the ordinary people. Without the heroic contribution of these soldiers and officers, I'm afraid probably more lives would be lost and more dikes probably would have broken.
Now, gentlemen, I raised this question actually in the context of how people look at the image of the armed forces. Since President Xi Jinping took the highest office, he launched the campaign of putting power into the cage. I mean, putting tigers in the cage. Therefore, we have had the disgraceful fall of Xu Caihou and Guo Boxiong, very senior military leaders in the Central Military Commission. Now, the general public start to say, hey, they use the taxpayers' money, and look at the rampant corruption inside the barracks and the military. Today, when we go back to examine the image of the armed forces, perhaps this is a wake-up call. I mean, this is a moment for the general folks and rank and file to seriously reflect upon their perception of the Army's image. What do you think of, say, the relationship between the public perception and the real sacrifice that our brothers and sisters in uniform are making?
Well, viewing from that point, I think this is these images really reinforce the belief that this is the army that is trustworthy and it is reliable in time of need. And we can see these soldiers, they are in the mud, they are in hunger, they are helping the people, or they're not complaining, and even in a poor condition.
And don't forget, most of them are the only child of the families.
They're the only child. They are so young. I see these young faces, but they are just simply reliable and trustworthy.
What do you think of the spirit of sacrifice?
Oh, definitely. I think these are true heroes for the people. But I want to mention one point, that is, even at the worst of the corruption in the military, I think it only involves high-ranking officers. The ranks and file of the soldiers, for example, are very, very solid soldiers. And I don't think the bulk parts of the military have been corrupted. It's only a very small handful of senior ranking officers, etc., who have enriched themselves at the public good, and also by sacrificing all the decency and the morality, for example, as well as violating all the military rules and disciplines in committing these heinous corruptions.
Gentlemen, the next question is very much about what went wrong with the drainage system of most of the urban areas. Some Western countries have established high standards of drainage since the 19th century. What lessons can China learn from other developed countries?
Well, look, this very concept, infrastructure, and has means in a large part of the structure that below ground. I mean, it's the drainage system. And China actually introduced this idea of infrastructure in a pretty, not too long. Then there is a, less of a focus in developing this infrastructure, developing this drainage system. And I think there's so much can be learned, especially from the places, especially cities in Europe, like in Paris, for instance, where the drainage system is so good. But I also want to point out in most of the cities built here in China, they are built in plain, the terrain, and perhaps not like in Paris, where you have the river running through the system, which make it relatively easier. Also, I think there is another important point, is in the last 2 decades we see more and more cities are built. There are a lot of the product being very wide avenues, boulevards, and the big squares. And I mean, these are certainly good for the local officials, the mayors, to show their performance. But developing this drainage system, less so. I think that's also contributed.
Now,
to
I
this
wonder
problem,
if you
right?
guys are aware that back to 2013, President Xi Jinping and his team came up with a novel concept of building sponge cities. That has a lot to do with what we've been discussing, the drainage system. We need to draw inspirations from other industrial nations, but is it possible for governments at different levels to develop an idea of building the underground infrastructure instead of focusing on image projects? What we call image projects are actually on the ground. But under the ground, you need to have a highly developed drainage system. Otherwise, you're going to have more of the properties and the people being immersed and being inundated when floods do take place next time. What do you make of this concern?
The first point I want to mention is that over the past 40 years or so, China's urbanization has really happened by leaps and bounds. Great achievements have been achieved. But on the other hand, there are also many weak points and weaknesses, including, in particular, this underground drainage system. I think a lot of attention, as you just now mentioned, and Professor Chi mentioned, have been devoted to the surface or whatever constructions or structures above ground. And there is a lack of attention for the underground drainage system.
That has a lot to do with how we look at the office performance of the government officials, right?
Yeah.
They believe only projects on the ground could generate headlines, could contribute to front page stories, could help promote their officialdom. But the underground is invisible.
Absolutely, it's not only invisible. In good time, for example, you even do not start to think about what exists underground for the drainage system. It's only when a big flood happens and you are either caught completely unprepared and all embarrassment or humiliation will happen to whoever who built that, or you will surprise the rest of the world with the quality structure you have put into the underground system, which will save life, which will drain the water away to lower level places. And I think this really makes a great difference. We need to learn from other countries, including in particular Germany, France, and Japan in this regard.
Victor and Professor, we have constructed the Ministry of Environmental Protection. Actually, we elevated the level of environmental protection from an agency to a ministry. And we have also developed an idea of a green GDP. But what about developing a new concept of accountability for the government officials? For example, an estimation of the casualties inflicted upon the local people with the floods. I mean, what about responsibility and accountability of the local government officials in terms of gauging and measuring their office performance?
Well, I think the organization department is actually working on this ever since the third session of the 18th Congress, under this overall idea of eco-civilization. And now we really need to reform the entire system of a performance evaluation. I think they are working on this, but this is not easy. GDP, as a numerical measure, is it's relatively easy to calculate and to measure. But
I think you guys have missed one important point in our discussion about the underground drainage system. Today, most of the urbanization in terms of property development has been finished or come to a close. The cities are exist there. Now, how could you build the underground drainage system without, damaging the roads, the streets, and disrupting the normal life of the residents of the urban areas? I mean, this could be a very severe ordeal for all the officials.
Well, absolutely. This was exactly what happened in Wuhan, the city of Wuhan, right? A couple of years ago, the mayor was called the Big Dig, right? So you see, the citizens were complaining about, you dig out the ground, the underground system, and in order to implement the subway back then. Well, actually, this could have been done better in an integrated approach, including the subway, including the drainage system, including other part, for the overall. The bad thing is, we don't really learn. Every time something like the flood happened, we learn one thing. The next time you learn another thing. Right?
Well, in a major city like Nanjing, for example, where the former mayor of Nanjing had been arrested and sentenced.
Jiwawa, his
Yeah,
nickname
Jiwawa.
was called Jiwawa.
Exactly.
He wanted to do exactly the same thing we are talking about.
You know, one of the big
underground
things he
project.
wanted to do is to build a new system underground to collect rainwater.
And
In
he has
normal
caused
days-
so much grievances among the general
Absolutely,
public.
because it's really
And that
a
turned out to be
nuisance.
the undoing of his performance.
That is right.
Ironically.
But this
Right.
kind of project has to be done, and with or without public support. You know, you cannot just give up such important infrastructure projects if some people complain, because the worst you will get is that the people will be hit by a big flooding and lots of life will be lost and property will be damaged. So I think the local officials really need to wake up and realize the importance of such very important underground infrastructure projects.
In our hindsight wisdom and our review of the lessons we got to draw from so much disasters and tragedies, what can be done in the foreseeable future in terms of improving the ecological system and the sponge city image? Professor?
Well, I think this smart city is a great idea, and a lot of money, the financial resources, has already been allocated for this. I think the real lesson here is, you know, we have to do the real work other than just image projects. And I'm very concerned if this smart city, just a concept, just an image project, will unfortunately will see more flood, more damages, you know, like what have seen. I think.
But one thing
more
that's
disastrous.
one thing that is really worried people around the world is the irreversible process of global warming. That's the centerpiece of Al Gore, former vice president of the Clinton administration. He's been talking about the disasters and consequences arising from urbanization and a lack of attention to the environmental protection. So are you optimistic or pessimistic as to our improvement of the environment by reducing the level of coal burning and turning to the use of green fuel?
No, I think on the one hand there is increasing evidence that global warming is real and is happening even faster than most of the scientists predict, and the consequences of global warming on mankind as a whole and on the whole Earth as a whole will be tremendous. On the other hand, I think in China in particular, it's fortunate that the government and the people have higher awareness of global warming, and also they have become more and more aware of the need that they need to do much more than before to take measures to counter the consequences of global warming.
Thank you very much.
This gives us hope.
Yes, indeed, we are paying a heavy price for our mistakes and stupidity of all countries in the process of industrialization since perhaps the 17th century. I'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.